The file was 3 centimeters thick in physical print, which told me something about Von L before she said a word. A species that still produced hard copy for intake interviews was a species that trusted weight, heft as credential, the object itself as argument. She sat on the desk between us with both of her lower hands, which left the upper pair free. A posture her kind used, I'd been told, when they wanted to signal that the conversation was already decided, and the remaining steps were procedural. The Valdrek Honors Institute seal embossed the cover. Below it, in the Institute's registration font, Solano, Hale Edward. Field classification, catastrophic variable. My name was on a sticker below his. Someone had used a label maker. You understand, Von Ale said, that we are required by the Valdrek Charter to conduct a full inheritance assessment before placing a legacy applicant in active coursework. I was told intake processing, I said. Nobody mentioned inheritance. They are the same procedure for your species. She opened the file to a tabbed section, red tab, which her aide had told me in the corridor meant active institutional trauma. Hale Solano completed 11 months of the honors track before his file was escalated to the rector. In that time, he achieved the third highest combat assessment score in the Institute's recorded history, destroyed 2 practice simulators, caused a significant disruption during the VETH Diplomatic Observation Week, and, this is the part I want you to understand, Miss Solano, refused 7 separate documented occasions to accept the corrections of a senior instructor. I looked at the page she was indicating. The incident reports were thorough. They had my father's handwriting in the margin of one, a single annotation in the tight block letters he used when he was being precise. The correction was wrong. He wasn't wrong, I said. Von L's upper hands folded inward, a gesture her aide had not covered. I filed it under new data. That response, she said carefully, is flagged in the inheritance protocol as a significant marker. I'm sure it is. It indicates high probability of legacy behavioral replication. She turned to a chart. It had my father's trait scores on one axis, and what I assumed were population norms on the other. Several of his scores disappeared off the edge of the graph. We use this instrument to assess the degree to which a legacy applicant has internalized the predecessor's pattern. Your response pattern in the last 30 seconds scores at. She checked a secondary readout, 81% concordance. I agreed with him on one factual point, I said. About a specific incident I wasn't present for. That's not internalization. That's a position. The instrument does not distinguish. Then the instrument has a design flaw. Upper hands moved again. Both of them, this time, and further inward than before. This was the part I had been warned about. Not by my father. He had never spoken about Valdrek directly, which was its own kind of communication, but by the intake coordinator at the regional relay station, a Korathi woman on her third posting who had looked at my application and said, simply, they will hand you his file like it's a mirror. Don't look at it that way. I had asked her what way to look at it. She had thought for a moment and said, like it's a map of someone else's terrain. Solano. Vonal's voice had shifted into what I was coming to recognize as her procedural register, flatter, slightly slower, the cadence of someone reading from an internal script. I want to be direct with you about the purpose of this assessment. The Valdrek Charter's inheritance protocol exists because legacy applicants whose biological predecessors have an institutional record, carry a statistically significant probability of replicating the predecessor's pattern. In your father's case, that pattern produced results that were, simultaneously, among the most impressive this institute has ever recorded, and among the most destabilizing. We are not here to punish you for his record. We are here to determine how much of that record is, functionally, yours. I let that sit for a moment. Outside the classification wing's single window, the orbital ring's maintenance track ran its slow circuit. A conveyor of small lights, regular and indifferent, the same whether anyone was watching or not. I have a question, I said. Of course. In your inheritance model, the one the protocol runs on, what's the mechanism? How does the pattern transfer? Von Ale blinked. For her species involved a secondary membrane crossing the eye horizontally. I'm not certain I understand the question. I'm asking about the causal pathway. My father had a pattern. You believe I carry it. What's the vector? Genetic? Behavioral conditioning? Direct instruction? The research literature supports a composite model. Because if it's genetic, I said, I can tell you what I know about human inheritance, which is that cognition and behavioral pattern have extremely low heritability coefficients for specific institutional responses, high for broad temperament, low for the specific thing you're measuring, which is how a person responds to being corrected by an authority they believe is wrong. That's not in my chromosomes. That's a conclusion I arrived at independently by the time I was about 23, working structural crisis analysis for the Nairobi Infrastructure Authority, when my supervising director told me a load-bearing assessment was within tolerance, and I spent 4 days running the numbers until I could show him it wasn't. I paused. The bridge is still standing. I mention that because it's relevant to the question of whether the pattern produces bad outcomes. Vonale looked at me, her upper hands were completely still. That story, she said, is not in the file. No, I agreed. It's in mine. She turned back to the inheritance protocol chart with the expression. And I was learning her expressions now, cataloging them the way I cataloged load tolerances. Of someone who has arrived at a calculation that returns an unexpected value. She checked the readout. She checked it again. The protocol, she said slowly, is designed to assess concordance with the predecessor file. It is not designed to process, she stopped, additional data, I offered. Independent data, she said. Data that does not derive from the predecessor's record. Another pause. You are the first legacy applicant in my 17-year tenure who has generated a meaningful independent data set during intake. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that this was possibly a design flaw larger than the first one. I said, instead, what does the protocol return when the independent data doesn't map to the inheritance model? Von Ale consulted something on her terminal that I couldn't see from my side of the desk. The maintenance track outside continued its circuit. After a while, she said, it returns a null classification pending manual review. And how long does manual review take? Typically, 6 to 8 weeks. I was scheduled to begin the materials track on Monday. Yes, I'd like to begin the materials track on Monday. Von Ale's secondary membrane crossed her eyes again, slower this time. She looked at the file, Solano, Hale Edward, 3 centimeters of documented pattern, and then at me, and I knew what she was doing, because I had done it myself in 12 years of structural. She was trying to determine whether the thing in front of her was a variant of a known category or a new category entirely. It was the most important question in the discipline. Getting it wrong in either direction had consequences. The manual review process, she said finally, can be expedited if the applicant provides a self-generated classification framework. I have one, I said. She slid a form across the desk. I wrote in the top field where it asked for classification basis. Individual record, self-constructed, origin date, current. In the field asking for predecessor relationship, I wrote, prior context, not predictive. I slid it back. Von Ale read it. Then she did something I had not seen her do in the preceding 40 minutes. She opened a new drawer in her classification terminal. Not one of the existing ones. A new one, blank, with a cursor blinking in the label field. She looked at me. What would you like it called? She asked. I thought about my father's handwriting in the margin of the incident report. Tight block letters. The correction was wrong. He had been right about the correction. He had also, from everything I could piece together, been difficult in ways that were not always useful and stubborn, in ways that sometimes were, and brilliant in ways the Institute had never quite known what to do with. He was not a warning. He was not a mirror. He was a man who had come here before me and done what he could with what he had, and some of it had held and some of it hadn't, and none of it was mine to either carry or put down. It was just terrain, someone else's terrain, useful to know, not mine to live in. Solano Mira, I said. Field classification, pending first assessment. Von Ale typed it in. Class is Thursday, she said. Materials and applied load theory, room 7. Thank you, I said. I left the file on the desk, not as a statement. It just didn't belong to me, and there was no point in carrying weight that wasn't mine.